Hello, hello. Yon, all right. So thank you so much, Shed, for answering. Okay, so thank you so much, everyone. All right. So I guess we can now all start, and let's just let the others join as we already start. Okay, so let me just pause this music for a bit. All right, let's go. All right, so everyone, can you see my screen as of the moment? Please type 2 if you can see my screen. All
Yes.
righty. Thank you so much. All right, so now welcome everyone for SkillSpire's Java for Newbies free workshop. So again, in this workshop, you will learn the lucrative field of software engineering. We'll have live hands-on instruction on Java and cloud computing, live Q&A, and also this is really perfect for beginners. So let me talk about our host for this afternoon. So our host is Mr. Andrew Smith. Andrew Smith is a professional developer with over 10 years of experience. He's currently working for Magellan Midstream Partners LP, helping develop enterprise level solutions. And he's nearing completion of a Master's of Science in Computer Science at Oklahoma State University. So, guys, are you all excited to learn from Andrew Smith? If you are, please type 1 if you're excited to learn from Andrew Smith. Type 1. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. So, Andrew Smith, take your time. It's your time to shine now. Take over. Yeah.
All right. Can you guys hear me all right? Great.
Yep, yep.
All right, let me bring up my presentation here. All right. Is that coming through okay? Great. All right. Yes. Thank you for having me. This is going to be kind of a nice workshop, but I think to get the most out of this workshop is to interact. So if at any point you have a question, don't hesitate to ask because that's what I'm here for. I'm here to answer questions, facilitate anything that you might have in regards to Java development. Um, but with that, let me move on to the second slide here. So who am I? That's the question. Uh, this above all, let thine own self be true, right? So a little bit about me. My educational background, I actually started out self-taught. Um, they didn't really have boot camps available, otherwise, that would have been a great option. But I started out in the industry getting very fortunate right out of high school with a small business giving me a chance. Um, but I eventually hit a paywall um, that required some more education to get into the corporate environment. So I went back and I got an Associates of Science. Um, and it requires so much math. I got one in computer information systems and then one in mathematics because that's just how it works. You have to have a lot of math at a regular university. Then I went on to complete my bachelor's of science with a major in computer science. However, I was really done with math at that point. I didn't want to take multivariable calculus, I believe it was. So I took some other electives. I have a fascination with artificial intelligence and machine learning. So I took a class in cognitive science, which ended up bringing on a new passion. So my minor is actually in sociology. Um, and then, of course, as mentioned, I started pursuing my master's of science in computer science with an emphasis on machine learning. Professionally, I've worked in the industry for, you know, more than 10 years, we'll just say that. I've worked for, McKesson, which is the top 10 in the Fortune 500. I currently work for oil and gas energy, um, as mentioned, Magellan Midstream Partners. But other than that, I have several hobbies, right? So I like to do a lot of stage acting and sometimes do indie films. I like doing magic tricks, and I play video games with my kids. Um, so that's who I am. and I'm glad you're all here to listen to me speak a little bit about this passion I have that's software development. So I'll move on to the next slide. So why Java? Well, that's a good question. There's a lot of good things about development, and there's a lot of languages to choose from. Java is one that is really heralded in the industry. It was actually derived by accident. Um, it was the Sun Microsystems. They were trying to make a cleaner version of C++. Um, and in their work in doing that, they created basically what we now refer to as a Java virtual machine. This allowed for faster loading. It loads differently than say C++. Um, and they originally called it Oak, and it morphed into Java. Uh, and it was open source, and it just, because of the level that it actually compiles on, allowed for efficiencies that hadn't been seen before. It just took off. Has been quite a staple in the industry ever since. Oracle eventually bought Sun Microsystems. So, because it was already integrated with Oracle Financials quite efficiently. And, so there are some people that weren't happy with the decision, but we still have what's called OpenJDK, which is the complete open source version of Java Development Kit, which I did mention. And with this is some of the best documentation. There are many documents that allow for any development level to come in and find out what a function does, or a package, I should say, that you can import, and what those packages can do for your software solution. And this way, it's allowed Java to continuously grow. I believe it's on like 19 at the moment. Although typically in an enterprise environment, we stick with the long-term solutions. So that's going to be LTE, and that's going to be stuff like, I think it's 17 is the current one. I don't think they've promoted any others to the LTS, I should say. Java is just one of these giant software solutions that's, is used by, Amazon, um, Chase, I mean, the list goes on and on. Netflix, Google, the Android operating system is built upon the foundations that is Java. I did mention the portability through the JVMs. Um, the only thing that's really faster than Java would be C and C++. Um, but those have a lot more overhead. Um, you have to really factor in memory allocation through pointers and a lot more complexity. So there's a lot more ease to jumping into Java than say some of those more lower level languages. Um, and because of the nature of Java, we have a tremendous amounts of um, environments to develop in, IDEs. These allow for quick building. You have my favorite is IntelliJ. It's a desktop application made by JetBrains. It's a wonderful IDE for Java. There's a lot of great cloud solutions available now. In fact, one by Amazon called AWS Cloud 9. So then you don't even have to install, Java Development Kit onto your desktop. You can just do everything directly in the cloud and compile, which is really great for quick development, and allows for developers who work remotely to just, pop open their laptop and start coding away after they authenticate. And because of these IDEs, we've got a lot of tools that help us scaffolding. That's to quickly and easily build the structure of a complex solution. Thymeleaf is a good solution for that, for the Java development. Um, so, and of course, with this, we have the ability to create APIs, or application programming interfaces. Um, Essentially, these APIs are what drive the backbone to everything that you do. If you were to go to Amazon.com right now and open up your browser's console output, you would see hundreds of calls to various APIs. These APIs produce what you see on the screen as a user interface. Um, It's through these reusability of APIs that have exploded this industry because ultimately we can't have enough of them. We need an API for everything, whether it be loading a customer's catalog or loading a funny GIF or GIF if you prefer. We need an API for that. And as a result, we need developers to help us take in this complex industry, take in the business requirements, and create APIs. So, as you can see, this is an index that is updated monthly, and it reflects on the past year's changes. Java has been, for as long as I can remember, in the top 10, if not the top 5. Python's really exploded in the last several years, particularly because of machine learning and artificial intelligence, powered by things like Google and OpenAI through Microsoft's donations. So Java is, as you can see, very much a mainstream application. C and C++ are always kind of going to be there because you have a lot of legacy systems that require those fundamental programs, particularly in like government agencies. They don't upgrade often. And again, if you need hardware written code, that's what you're going to go to. But if you need like a web server or a web app or an API, the most of the industry uses Java and C Sharp for those. So that's why those two kind of go back and forth battling each other for dominion. Um, but yeah, move on to the next one. So um, ultimately, the question comes around salary, right? Uh, that's a good question. It all depends on where you are on the entry level compensation. Assuming that everyone here were entry level, uh, there are plenty of sites like Glassdoor.com that can provide an insight to the expected salary range for an entry level developer in your area. But I will say over time, particularly as you advance in your career, um, it does pay well. It's a competitive field with lots of expansion. Um, I can't complain. um, you know, I have I've gone from the low end to this to the high end of this throughout my career. But it's definitely something that obviously, if you're going to invest in this as a career, you need to know the options available to you. The cost of living adjustments aside, that's why you should look at these sites to see what's pertaining to the average salary for this position in your area. But typically, it's a skill, right? And trade skills of any type, manual labor or not, um, bring value to a company, and with that, bring good salaries that are have to be competitive a lot because they're always having they don't you don't want to have turnover in this position. These are positions where they do want to keep you a long time typically because there's a lot of what we call technical debt. So when we bring on someone new, it takes months usually for them to get inundated with uh, security posturing at the company, setting up your environment. Lots of these things have to be taken into account. And so once you have been there for several months, you're finally able to start developing. The last thing a company wants to do is to lose you. You become an asset. So that's something to think about. Um, if you get with the right company, you're not just another number. You're an asset, a valuable asset to the company as a whole. They invest in you as you put output for them. So SkillSpire does these boot camps, which are wonderful. Because the long university track isn't for everybody. Um, and I remember when I started out, I was really frustrated with you know, why do I have to take chemistry one and two? All I really want to do is work on computers. I don't understand. So, the boot camps really help you not have to focus on that. You get to do what you love, right? You get to work on something you want to learn. And I think that's the most important thing. Um, so when I heard SkillSpire had this opportunity, there's someone who's on this meeting. I won't say her name. Um, but I took the opportunity to reach out, and they asked me to come on board, and I've been happy to do so. So then, so what can we do to educate in a boot camp? We have 20 weeks. I know it sounds like a lot, but there's a lot to cover. But we start at the very beginning. We want everyone to have an opportunity to come in. If you have a little bit of experience, that's fine. Some of it will be rehashing for you, but we start at the very beginning, understanding, what is a variable, what are variable types. There's going to be some very simple math, but you're going to understand what a string is, how to process a string, um, conditional statements related to if, else if. And then we'll do some simple looping. Um, Regression is your friend as a developer. So we have to loop and loop often. We'll talk about, various methods, public, private, what those mean, protected. And then our true friend as data scientists at times that we have to be, we'll work with arrays, dealing with how array inputs are, an array of integers, an array of objects, and some efficiencies behind those, a standard array, a linked list array. And then we'll get more into what makes Java so powerful, object-oriented programming. We'll go in depth about classes and inheritance and how those relate rationally so that you can understand the concepts that'll make you successful in this field. Um, you know, there are really three types of programming paradigms. There's procedural programming, object-oriented programming, and functional programming. Procedural is really the old school way. It's resulted in what we refer to as spaghetti code. It's a mess. It's all over the place. Um, and object-oriented programming is basically the de facto way to develop. It makes logical sense, and it's easy to rationalize with complex structures. Functional is great for data scientists. You'll see it in languages such as F sharp, and I can't even remember the other one at the top of my head. There are ways to do some functional programming within Java. We use lambdas to do that, but lambdas have other functionalities that are more related to database structures. Again, this is all stuff we would go into in more depth in the course. And then generics. Generics are a really great concept that allow reusability in your methods. Um, so, so then once we're done with that, you'll be able to see something like this, which uses generics. It's just a simple structured class. I wanted to show an example of what if you can't read it now, you'd be able to understand it with more, time. But stuff like this. If you weren't sure you were ready to do this, if you needed to do a little bit of research to decide was for you, there's great resources. GitHub is the source for all open source code and has millions and millions of lines of Java code that you can look at and explore and dig in to see if this is something that you really enjoy. Um, some of my examples, I think, come from Coding for Geeks. Um, they have really baseline examples that I don't have to worry about exposing any propriety stuff I work at my office. um, and so, yeah, generics use typically the capital T. They don't have to. That's just kind of the standard. And that just and it evaluates that the method is a generic and it can use several types that can be evaluated within that class. So then I mentioned earlier about APIs, and the reason for that is because APIs are the backbone to everything that we do in modern development. Um, And to elaborate on that, a lot of newer stuff is being done with what we call microservices. Microservices are really blowing up the industry. Something we really couldn't have done 15 years ago because of the resource demand. Um, you'd have to have several servers just to accommodate hundreds of different microservices, and the costs inherent to that. But cloud computing, such as AWS and Azure and Google Cloud, have allowed us to expand into these areas that corporates and even small businesses can evaluate the cost efficiencies, because you can pay for the resources you need rather than just always having hardware sitting there that you may not need to use all the time, but you had to pay for and maintain, secure. So with these enhancements, they've allowed us to do these microservices. They're essentially, instead of having hundreds of thousands of lines of code to do one big solution, you may actually have a solution that has two or three classes in it to consume a very small request and process it to yet another microservice that carries it along the chain. Um, and in Java, we have the opportunity of what's called Spring Boot. Um, so yes, I wasn't going to talk about Spring or Boots, but I decided to throw an image in there of Spring and Boots because, that's my kind of humor. I'm a dad. So, and we will discuss a lot about Spring Boot. We'll talk about the basics of it, how you can use it. There's Spring, which is basically, a web service for Java, and then Spring Boot is the further extension of that to allow for microservices. Um, and so then we'll talk about the Java database connections, because almost everything that you'll do in the real world will connect to something, right? Not everything is going to be user input. A lot of it's going to be using data that resides within a database. So how do we connect to that? How do we use that efficiently? And that's what we'll go into, those kind of elements, because consuming entities from a database is paramount to being a successful developer in the modern era. And then a lot of these will be built microservices as RESTful APIs. So then that's why we talk about Spring REST as the implementation of a RESTful API. And I don't know if I even made that big enough for me to read. Let me see. Ah, yes. Okay. I had to zoom in a little bit. Apologies. But yes, this is just an example of a RESTful API. As you see, we have annotations to help us wire up fundamental what we call get and posts. There's also a delete command in here. Um, so these are things that if you were to get a business requirement from, say from, someone on the sales floor says, I need to be able to insert a company brand new. That's my job. I have to ensure that everything is proper. So that's where you would create an API that says post mapping / company, add company. As you see, we have just a company without having the code open and available here. That's an entity. So you would have either a blank entity that's populated from a user interface, passing that on into this post that then propagates into the database so that it can be retrieved from other processes. Um, that's essentially, what an API is going to do. Um, Depending on the business needs, of course, and the complexity of the request. This is just a simple layout to show you exactly what an API can do and what a RESTful API would do. So then once we have all the fundamentals of what Java is, what an object is, how classes and inheritance work, we'll go into, you know, taking those microservices and using them into the real world. And for this and the course that I teach, it's all about Amazon Web Services, or AWS. That's offered through Amazon, of course. They have a multitude of options to help you develop. Um, and when I say a multitude, I don't know if I'm explaining that well enough. There are hundreds of options. So half the battle is knowing what to use. When you are trying to think about a solution as a developer, what do you need to do to be successful? So we'll talk about that. And we'll talk about what is an S3 bucket and how does an S3 bucket benefit your software. We'll talk about an EC2, which is essentially a virtualized machine that can be elastic. And what elasticity means in this case is the sharing of resources for that AWS instance, um, which is one of the beautiful things about cloud. Before, like I said, we would have to buy a server blade. We'd have to estimate upfront the needs of development and then purchase this expensive hardware. Well, it's not necessary with AWS. I can buy a simple EC2 instance and then set it scalable. So that means if I have a lot of traffic coming in, um, the EC2 resources can be expanded with more RAM or more processing ability to accommodate the demand that's occurring now. Of course, this does bring up the price, and you can set the limits to how much you want it to expand. But those are some of the wonderful things we have with cloud computing. So then we have Lambda functions, really one of my favorite. Lambda functions are essentially a simple, it's almost not quite a microservice because a microservice has a lot of interoperability and heterogeneity that we'll talk about in the course. This is more just a function that consumes like an API, performs something, and then spits out a result. And it can just sit there, no charge to you until it's actually in use. Um, so you'll see a lot of architectures now using hundreds of these because they're very flexible. So we'll talk about those. And then, of course, as we talk about all these options within the cloud computing and the things that you can do as a developer to expand, we'll talk about architecture. I'm very big in wanting to make sure that students and people understand how to incorporate these ideas. Because it's one thing to develop. The next part of the battle is to understand what piece of the puzzle needs to go. And what I mean is, you know, does this belong in a microservice or is it a traditional, monolithic solution? Should it be a command line interface or is it a RESTful API? These are all things you have to evaluate and recommend as you grow as a developer. Um, so we'll talk about microservice architecture. We'll talk about model view controller. One of my favorite newer architectural paradigms, a vertical slice architecture, and all the best practices. With anything that you do architecturally, there's a favorite phrase, and it's just it depends. There is no perfect solution to what we do. There is only variables. So it always depends on the needs of the solution. So here is an example of a simplistic architectural design using AWS. I think this is a nice way to show, several different services that are available while also showing and demonstrating from beginning to end. So everything the user inputs flows through the Amplify that then is authorized into the API gateway that then hits a Lambda function. If it passes IAM, which is we use for security authorization, it then is inserted into the database. This is a very practical and realistic example of the things that you could do in AWS. So I alluded to this earlier. Development is just a big puzzle. And that's why I love it. Um, I always loved solving problems and puzzles, even jigsaw puzzles. Hence the picture. Um, development is not a perfect science, but it is always trying to solve a problem, whether that problem be, you know, create a new login page or create a new shopping cart or create a new machine learning algorithm that can help your users understand how to write code. These are all challenges. These are all problems to be solved. And that's what you as a developer can learn to do. It's a very rewarding career field, in my opinion. I may be biased, granted, but I think that if you enjoy solving problems, uh, there's no limit to the possibilities in this career field. Yes, the salaries also help. They do pay well. Um, and again, because you make yourself an asset to the company, I think if you have enthusiasm to learn and grow, programming is a very rewarding attribute to have as a skill set. If you, assuming that everyone here were wanting to get into this for the first time as an entry level developer, you know, if you have interest in that, it doesn't take long to become a developer too. To be honest with you, I've seen a, we just had someone at my company promoted to developer two, who had just been out of college, I think a year and a half. Um, and then again, I'm not gonna say her name, but we hired someone from a boot camp, and she's amazing. And she has demonstrated great skills, and I doubt, no doubt, that she's going to do great at our company. Um, and it's just there's just if you're interested and you continue to learn, your career in this industry is limitless. It's a really interesting field, and it's never boring. I'll say that much too. There's always challenges to be tackled. So I have been developing for a while. And right now I do a lot of higher end level stuff. I do a lot of architectural designs. I still do touch code. I do a lot of code reviews. I help a lot of newer developers. I try to guide best practices in my company. Um, and I still make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. We call them features sometimes, but they're bugs. Um, and you can never let that get you down. So that's why I put this quote in here. Uh, Ever tried, ever failed, no matter. Try again, fail again, fail better. That's just to say that every time you make a mistake, learn from it. And even if you fail again, that's okay. Learn from it. That's a learning exercise. There is just endless amounts. There is code that several years ago I would have written. I thought, man, this is the perfect solution. Doesn't get better than this until someone finds a bug, and I go, oh, what was I thinking? I didn't even know I failed then, but I learned from it, and I continue to grow and adapt. Um, and we're always feeding off new things that come out. Development is an ever-growing science with lots of ideas that can be better. I mean, Java, again, it's on version 19. Um, New ideas come out, new enhancements, be it more proficiency on some of the enumerations or new keywords that can help build new class structures. So it never truly ends because there's always something that you can do better. All right. Well, with that, I would like to open the floor to discussions. Ultimately, the most to get out of a workshop is to ask questions. So I'd like to open that to anyone who would like to ask away.
Yes, sir. Sir, I have a question regarding the microservices. Can you please a little bit brief it more?
Yeah, yeah, I can go into some detail. So it's just how much do I say? So a microservice. So let's say if you had like Spring Boot, you would have a very small defined layer. So let's say the problem was that you needed to create a new user. That's all the microservice is going to do. So in order to do that, you need to accomplish certain tasks. Almost every microservice is going to have a security layer. Typically, it's going to be a lot of them is going to be OAuth. There's JWT as well. So once you have that security layer, that means you can consume the request through an API call. So the microservice is essentially going to have that security layer and then the classes you need it to do. Specifically, in this case, you would have a structure for consuming the JSON, ideally, of what is a new user. What are the parameters to that? So as shown in the previous slide, you'd have a class with annotations, a get and a post. So it's going to have a get user. So it's receiving something from the front end. Um, and depending on how you deploy this microservice, it could be like in a container, Kubernetes or Docker. And so then that's all this RESTful microservice is going to do. It's going to receive a JSON. It's going to understand what a new user is, and then it's going to post to its own database. A lot of the systems are using like MongoDB. Um, Really depends on what you're trying to architecturally solve. Again, it depends. But you could use a NoSQL instance to take that JSON, consume it, and then post it into the MongoDB. And so that's all self-contained. A microservice has to have what we call heterogeneity. That means it doesn't matter what other systems are using code-wise. It only cares about itself, right? It's interoperability and heterogeneity. So that means that if you have your front end is written in React, the microservice does not care. It only cares about what it's consuming, which is a JSON. And then you can process that JSON into Java code. And then you can post that Java code using a Java database connection using Hibernate to insert that into a relational data store. Or if it's a NoSQL, you'd use that instance. And so then it has to have its own database. Those are really the things that are important to a microservice. So as long as it has that database and it has those services that allow it to be interoperability, then you have a true microservice. Now, how you get that stuff out of there depends on the architectural needs. A lot of the times, what we'll have is a message queue. So you'll have an event bus that reads triggers perhaps to the relational data store that you have the data dropping into related to the microservice, and then those will drop into a message queue. The message queue will take the request and then it can back propagate it to legacy database systems or to any other application within your infrastructure that might need to know about this new user that's been created. Does that help?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yeah.
So in the beginning, when you just say, just introducing the Java, you told us that the Java was accidentally found and it was little similar to C and C++. So is this similar to C Sharp or .NET as well?
Oh, that's a good question. So, uh, Java is using what's called Java virtual machines. That's used as a way to run that language because Java is run as an intermediary language. It doesn't directly communicate to the machine code. It has to have an intermediary level that consumes your code and then writes it into machine code. And that also happens with C Sharp through the .NET framework. The .NET framework is the intermediary language in that situation, so that you can write stuff in C Sharp, F Sharp, Visual Basics, and then the .NET framework consumes that request as an intermediary language and then writes it to machine code. The beauty of that is you as a developer don't have to worry about garbage collection or memory pointers or a lot of the other minutia that you typically have to when writing in C and C++, because those things don't have those helper functions, as we like to call them, because you're writing directly to the hardware's memory. So you need to specifically declare a memory pointer and then reference that memory pointer throughout your program. And then you need to call garbage collection at the various intervals throughout your program. But you don't with Java. You don't with C Sharp. That's the beauty of those functional higher functioning programming languages is you have that intermediary language to consume those requests for you, and then the framework does that for you without you having to worry. Good
Thank
question.
you, sir.
Yeah,
I have a question.
of course.
So I'm as well self-taught uh, software developer. I've been doing it for about 6 months now. I taught myself. I have a basic understanding of HTML and CSS. Um, I am currently learning JavaScript, which is it's okay. It's it's some hiccups there. But
Agreed.
yeah, as I'm trying to learn, um, as I'm trying to enter into this field, trying to become a professional entry level software developer, what I'm finding is it's very hard to get on with a company because they want you to know not just HTML, not just CSS, not just Java. They also want you to know the APIs, which is okay because you have to have the APIs because they are the backbone. But they also want you to know the SQLs and things of that nature. So it's kind of hard to figure out what language to start with because they're asking for so much as a entry level.
Yes. Yes, you're absolutely right. Um, there are there's a misconception in our industry. Um, a big part is every company wants the perfect full stack developer, as they call it. Being a true full stack developer is really hard in the modern era. Um, it was easier 15 years ago when you had just HTML4, not even 5. All right. And CSS was a lot more simplistic. Um, and as you noted, JavaScript. Man, I have a love hate relationship with JavaScript. JavaScript loves to render the page for the user. That's its job. It wants to make sure that the user experience is loaded. As a result, it lets a lot of things go by. It's not tightly scripted unless you add something else to it. And we've got a lot of great frameworks. React has really become a big one to help us take JavaScript and make it more robust, as well as capturing things to make sure that developers don't make mistakes. Because pure JavaScript, whew, man, it's too forgiving. You'll spend hours and hours debugging to find out you missed something in a simple little area. So it's just not very forgiving. Uh, but yes, the thing is yes, they want the full stack experience. They want the full stack developer. Realistically, it's I think particularly as an entry developer, it's good to focus on either front end or back end. It's really, I'm not saying it's impossible. It's just there's so many technologies and there's so much robust ways to approach a problem. It's better to try, as particularly entry level, to focus on something that you're good at and then selling that. You have to be your own salesman, selling your skill sets. So then, if you do want to focus on the front end and do HTML5 with CSS and some JavaScript, you might incorporate a framework, either Angular or React, and then really sell that you understand the user experience, UX, that you can design or at least develop components to be utilized in the UX. Now, if you want to focus on the back end, then you go say, my skill sets are in developing back end APIs. I'm really good at understanding how an API consumes a request from the front end, how it integrates that into SQL, either through an ORM or pure SQL. Um, I don't recommend pure SQL be written, but I know some companies still do. I prefer using an ORM, though it is still important to at least understand the basics to SQL. That's a structured query language for anyone who isn't familiar with it. That is basically simplistic syntax for querying data, for inserting data and updating data within a relational data store, something like Oracle database or Microsoft uh, SQL Server. Um, So that's my only suggestion. I know you're going to see a lot of positions that want the full stack developer, and you'll see those positions stay posted for quite a while, because there's just a lot of those positions have been, that's what they used to always look for, but
Hmm.
realistically, it's, you really need to focus your skill set. Either it's going to be front end or it's going to be back end. And then over time and experience, you may know enough to what I like to call know enough to be dangerous, um, to where you can do a little bit of both, right?
Correct. So one of my things is that I found that I really like more than anything is to become an SQL developer. I do like the I've also seen that I do like the front end development of things because I'm more comfortable there.
Hmm.
Um, so it's kind of off-putting when I see a lot of these people go after these full stacks developing jobs, and with the new coming of Chat GPT, that just makes it all even worse because most of these people don't really know what's going on, and they're just finding the cheat code. They're using Chat GPT honestly to find the cheat code, which is
Yeah.
sad. But
Yeah, the last thing I want you to do is get overwhelmed and
mhm.
and give up, and say this didn't work out for you. So I would recommend, if you do like SQL, dig into it. Learn the difference between a left join and a right join, an outer join, left outer join, and right outer join.
Mhm.
Um, Figuring out how that data correlates on a Venn diagram so that you can really sell yourself on that. Sell you, because that's what's important when you go to the job interview, is presenting yourself and saying, "Hey, I'm not really sure what you're asking here, but I love to learn. And here's what I do know. I know structured query language. I know the entities and how those relate to back to front end, um, and everything else I can learn, because I'm a hard worker and I'm motivated. That's really how you want to do it. I hope
Okay.
that helps.
No, that definitely does help.
But the last
It's
thing I want is you to get frustrated. Don't you don't stretch yourself thin. If you do like the front end, then dig more into that. Understand, like I said, dig into Angular or React. I prefer React. Monica, I think, does too.
yeah.
I was gonna say, but um, if you really want to do front end, that's great. There's no shortage of that. Let me tell you. Good front end developers are hard to find. Understanding that user experience would be where I would dig in there
Okay. That's definitely some good advice. I greatly do appreciate it.
anytime.
I have a related question with the TJ. Actually, I am just very new to languages, and I just need to know how just Java gonna help me find a job or land a job as a like a junior engineer or as a startup.
Yeah. So Java is, you can write just about anything with it. I mentioned briefly that we have a scaffolding tool called like Thymeleaf, and a lot of these IDEs help you scaffold out a project. So, you know, if your company that is looking for someone who writes desktop apps, Java can do that. If they're looking for someone that needs to write a backend API, Java can do that. If it just needs to be a command line interface that interacts with another Linux or Windows service, Java can do that. There's really not much Java can't do. Um, so it's really one of those languages that's in demand. In fact, I mean, it's not great what's happened in the industry lately with some of the bigger companies. Um, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, they all hired on a lot of people
Hmm.
during the pandemic. Um, and they've let a lot go. But there's also reports that they're looking for bringing on more entry level people because, honestly, some of the seniors' salaries got a little out of
Yeah.
hand.
Yeah, true.
um, just gonna put it out there. We're not cheap.
Yeah.
Um, So there are a lot of opportunities for entry level developers, and Amazon and Google both use Java
And
holistically.
do we have to be like do I have to have another thing learn with this crash course or this course that been offered by skills fairs, or does the course that they are offering is enough for just go and just start learning something else in the company?
Let's see. Let me see if I understand the question. So you're wanting to know if the tech stack taught by SkillSpire is sufficient enough to get into an entry level position. Is that reiterating the question properly?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah.
Basically,
So
yes.
so yeah, the tech stack that's taught by SkillSpire covers Java and all the things you would use with Java. So you would
Okay.
learn how to write Java, and then you would learn how to use that with Spring Boot, which is very big for microservices. And then you would also learn cloud computing with like AWS, which could also translate to Azure if you went to a company that used Azure or
Hmm.
or Google Cloud Computing. So it teaches the skills on several technical stacks so that you can apply that to your resume and hopefully get you the your dream job. I hope that
Okay.
helps.
Yeah, that helps. Like TJ said, like he has so much experience in like getting so much knowledge on HTML, CSS, SQL, like other stuff. But like as I maybe like some other person in this conversation, they might just have this might be their first experience going into language. So that's what my question was, just because I heard that question, and then he is getting more questions and more rejections from the companies, even though he knows something, um, some more things than us uh, personally, right? So that's sort of my curiosity, to just know like is something else we need to do other than this Java program to just land as an entry level job or not. So that's what my main question was.
Yeah, no, you could definitely start. I mean, Java's a great starting place.
Okay.
I mean, it just, you can also start with HTML5, but that's a different kind of trajectory.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
could also lead to Java. It doesn't help to know one or the other. It
Hmm.
helps, either one is good. It just depends on what you're
Hmm.
looking for. Java's going to be more back end, but it does have some front end aspects. So don't get me wrong there. Um,
No, I'm
so,
not getting it like wrong or in like negative way. I'm
oh
just
yeah.
trying to just get something so that I can understand, though I have to learn something else as well as Java, or just focus on Java and then learn Java as much as I can, uh,
Yeah, you could
so that
definitely
be
do
in the
that. Yeah. Java will get you far.
okay. All
Yeah.
right. Thank you.
Yeah. And the good thing is we teach a
Mhm.
lot about object-oriented programming.
Yeah, that's what
So
I
let's
thought.
so if you went to a position and they saw that you only had Java and they do C sharp, um,
Hmm.
it'd be very easy to translate. You could take the skills that you learned from Java. Because I'm just gonna be honest, Microsoft took a lot of ideas from Java when they developed C Sharp. There's a
Hmm.
lot of parallelisms to them, and it is what it is.
Okay.
You know, so
Hmm.
learning the object-oriented concepts are very
Hmm.
important. And I also like to cover clean coding practices. I'm very big on making code reusable and
Hmm.
readable. So any of those skills that you take from the class help translate into being a successful developer.
Good to know that. Thank you.
Yep.
Sir, if Microsoft has taken a lot of from Java, so I mean, are these relatable if we just learn Java? So can we work on C sharp or .NET as well, or no?
So there are, as the languages have grown, they have their own keywords, but syntactically, there's a lot of similarities, and for good reason. you want developers, you know, to understand from one language to a next as best you can. Specifically when you're making a new language, like when C# was first being implemented, Java was the only other option that's similar to it. And so it's like when the Roman Empire would conquer a civilization, they would try to integrate them into their society so that the transition wasn't so bad. Well, they kind of did that with C#. They kept a lot of the similarities. So, understanding object-oriented programming is really the key to moving to another OOP um, language such as C sharp. Once you understand those, learning what we call the syntactical sugar, um, it basically helps migrate to the different variances. Oh, I see. Um, String literals are something you can do in C sharp, whereas Java, it's not as straightforward using a string literal. So there are going to be nuances, um, but they translate pretty well overall. The key focus is not to try to do that at the beginning. You'll want to focus on Java. You'll want to focus on learning object-oriented programming within that language. And then once you feel like you're at least at an intermediary language, you can start looking at the comparisons between other languages and how you can translate your newfound skill set to, sell yourself as being someone who also understands Python or C sharp or F sharp.
That was definitely a lot of information. uh, so yeah, I do agree with them. I think learning Java would definitely be a excellent source because you can slowly transition and use some of the same things into going into C sharp. That way, it's like almost as essentially you're learning two languages in one. But you don't really want to overwhelm yourself because I think that's one of the things that when I first started learning the code, I was overwhelming myself with
Right.
trying to learn two different ones, trying to be able to build websites and things of that nature. It's it was just a lot for me. Um, the back end development, I know absolutely nothing of it. I'm not even gonna lie to you.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, I would definitely not want.
Yeah.
What I would really want a student to do is to focus on Java and understand the programming paradigm inherent to that language. So that would be primarily as an object-oriented programming language. Understanding class structures, inheritance, when to use public, when to use private, and why. Why do we have public and private? You
Yeah.
know, if once you start understanding those concepts, and then you start passing objects such as an integer class or your own custom class. And then you start working with those classes through what we call inheritance, inheriting those objects. And then, we will talk about, more advanced object-oriented programming concepts such as dependency injection, you know, and the different types of dependency injection, whether it be a constructor dependency or, a static class, which I don't recommend doing. I prefer constructor. Spoiler. um, but once you understand those concepts and you understand when to use them, then you can start evolving into maybe expanding into another language. Um, obviously, like English and German, they have a lot of similarities as a you know, as a speaking language. Um, but I wouldn't want to learn German until I really understood at least one basic language so that I can communicate well into that. Then once I feel like I have a first language down, then I can start going into a second language. I would approach computer languages just the same.
mm, okay, that definitely does make sense.
Yeah.
Are there any other
Um,
questions?
last question. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm taking over.
It's okay.
You mentioned AWS.
hmm
So with AWS, I know there are I know there's a lot of different routes you could go in AWS, and I know that instead of buying, well, not buying, you learn about different cloud things you can do in AWS. If
Hmm.
somebody were to learn the Java and then transition into the AWS, would this help them as well? Like
Oh
trying to be like,
yes.
okay,
Yeah, so what I like to do with this in this course is I like to have the students sign up for a free tier of AWS. Because you get 1 year for free when you sign up. There are limitations to it as a free tier account, but it's enough for us to play with, which is important because I feel like working in the environment is the best way to learn the environment. And one of the key features that you would learn on day one, once we started playing with that, is that anything you write on your local device, you can upload the jar, as we call it, Java archival record. You can upload that jar into a Lambda function or directly into an EC2 or even just an S3 bucket if it's a straight HTML. Um, so yeah, anything you develop on your local device, you can have deployed into the cloud just by uh, compressing it into a jar and uploading it. So it's actually your code running in the unlimited resources available through Amazon Cloud. It's cool
So
when you
it's
think about it.
basically okay to just um, make a code in Eclipse or other um, uh, other wherever we can write down the code and save java.file and then uploaded it into the cloud computing, or do we have to make any changes in the code or to add on something to just upload, or it's just a straight upload?
That is a loaded question. Again, it goes back to it depends. It depends on your needs, what you're trying to upload it to. If it's an EC2, that's basically a virtualized server, and you can do anything you want with that. Just be aware there's cost inherent to it. Now, with the
Yeah.
free tier, you do get like I think 2 gigs of RAM and maybe a dual core processor. So if it falls within those parameters, you can upload anything you want and it works fine. If it's just an HTML page you want to have rendered when a user hits your URL, S3 bucket's perfect for that. Um, if you're wanting to do a Lambda function, you could write an API gateway that consumes, and oh, I think you get like 1 million free hits a month with
No.
a Lambda, meaning in this course you're never going to hit that limit because we're never going to hit it 1 million times. Um,
Yeah.
so then you just upload your straight Java code directly into the Lambda function.
Thank
And
you.
if you didn't want to do it locally, again, they do have a great the AWS Cloud 9 is a IDE for developing Java and other languages directly within AWS. So then you don't even have to create a compressed file. You can tell it directly from the IDE how to use it within that cloud service. You just have to, you know, configure that a little bit with the IAM workflow.
Good to know that. Thank you.
Yep.
I got a question.
Yep.
Uh, is regard is that related to the cloud, the GitHub or GitLab? Is that another form of cloud storage place that you send your code to that everybody could access that?
That's a good question. That actually has to do with what we call source control. So Git is the backbone to modern day source control. Before then, it was called Subversion. It's not as I mean, I still have to do Subversion every now and then, but most of it's Git. Git helps us create what we call branches. From those branches, we can work on our code, and then we can push those code changes to like a development or production quality branch. And GitHub is basically a public Git repository. So that means that any code that you develop, you can share, or you can make it private if you want to. But it's just more of a storage facility and a sharing network for our Git code. It's not so much, I don't want you to think of it as like a cloud infrastructure. That's more of what AWS Azure and Google Cloud are. Those are infrastructures that allow you to do computational things such as running code, um, running it on a server or as a Lambda function, whereas GitHub is more of a large source control repository for the world. Does that
Okay.
make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
Great. hmm And we do cover that. I really like using Git. I think the more we use an application called Educative, and you can download your code from there and play with it locally. And I really like the students to get used to using Git as well because it's pretty industry standard is to use Git commands. There's a lot of great interfaces. GitHub actually has a great desktop application for doing that. But we'll also talk about just straight up command line interface commands as well. We'll cover both, whether you like a GUI or not. Cover it.
Okay.
Great question though. Source control is important, and hindsight, I should have at least had one slide talking about source control. So I'm going to take that as feedback.
So, as far as assessments go, with this course, like, do we get assessed, and how often does that happen to test, how much we are learning?
Yes. So it's a very interactive environment. It has a virtualized interface. So it'll have basically an integrated IDE in the cloud, and it can run your code. You can also download that code and evaluate it. But for me to know where you're at, I would need for you to get it to working in the cloud environment so I can see that you're progressing through the steps. There are assessments along the way, and then it does have a capstone project towards the, latter part of the course. So, and the capstone project is a building up to, right? It's, you've learned Java, you've learned Spring Boot, you've learned AWS. Now, how can you put all those skills together to create an overarching project? And I'm there to help answer questions, derive problem solutions. We can do a workshop usually towards the end. We have more of those because, you might get stuck somewhere. But yeah, that's the overarching. It's not just lectures. There are workshops. There's interactive components. Because the best way to learn is by doing, not just listening, right?
True. One last question. I caught you at the tail end of your commentary about back end versus front end and full stack. Are you able to just give me like a brief summary? Sorry, I was on a work call while I was listening simultaneously.
That's okay.
Yeah.
So you just want to know the difference between what's expected of a front end or a back end or a full stack?
No, from your experience, like what would you recommend someone that's like freshly learning how to code start from, per se? Maybe I'm not asking
Ah,
this right, but
yeah, that's a good question. That's really all about the developer. What's your passion? You know, if you like working with backend, that's going to be more like wiring things, figuring out logical problems, processing those things into like a database or a flat file. Um, the backend's your way to go. If you really like visual output, if you really like getting something to the user, hey man, it's a simple submit button, but I wired it up and it works perfectly. I'm proud of it. Then that's the way to go. I mean, ultimately, you want to pursue in this career what makes you happy. So if you really need that visual cue, front end's your way. If you really need that puzzle solving logical cue, back end is the way. And then, of course, you can always work towards a full stack if you want.
gotcha. Thank you.
Yep. Good question. All right. Any other questions? Don't be shy. That's what I'm here for. All right. I think we've exhausted uh, all the questions then? If so, you know, if you ever have any questions or doubts about anything that I've discussed today, you know, just look into, skillspire's got some great documentation on their website. Go to GitHub and just look at some of the source code and um, explore it. Ultimately, I love to teach. I like to help people. I'm very passionate about development. I think it's a great field, and I would love to have everyone here as a student if that's what you want to do. And I love to answer questions. I love to dig deep into problems, and so just keep that in mind. If anything comes up after this that you don't feel got answered, reach out to Skillspire. If they don't know the answer, they'll direct it towards me, and I'll help get an answer as well. But that's all we're here to do is help. All right. I think that's it. I've turn it back to the organizer if nothing else.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Y'all have a good evening.
You too. Thank you. Bye bye.